Tracy
Hi,
Bourgoine,
Drew.
welcome to Dynamics Unplugged. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. It's exciting.
It is exciting. I'm really excited to have you to talk about something that's probably a little bit different, maybe from some of the other people I've had on the show before. We normally talk a lot about consulting and the way I consult, I guess, D365, traditional implementations, functional consultants. Your role's a little bit different. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a change management consultant. I know enough about ERP and CRM implementations to understand business processes and understand the journeys and changes that may or probably will impact the users. So my job is really to help the teams help the users navigate those journeys from day one, being aware of what's going to happen. So communicate early and often, be as transparent as possible, to helping start changing mindsets. Typical supply chain manager who's now going to be able to actually see and trust what they need to buy, right? Where they did it in spreadsheets before and relied on crappy data,
For sure.
right?
So for you, then your projects must be a lot more varied, right? You're not just Dynamics 365, FNSE, or CE. You're probably ranging all over the IT space and more, right?
Yeah. Typically within the dynamic space right now, I'm on a Salesforce project, but it's the same, right? Their sales processes are sales processes, and ERP processes are typically very the same too. The challenges are the same for users depending on the scope of the project, right? If they're going from 30-year-old legacy systems to now a modern ERP, that's huge, right? Or they're just doing a minor upgrade, they already understand ERP concepts. So sometimes it's even pushing fundamental process shifts and getting the right plans in place to train and educate users at the right pace based on understanding where they are to begin with. Like that's kind of the key, is taking the time to understand where the users are to begin with. And that's not a single answer, it's a diverse answer, because you're going to have lots of groups of users, right? So we kind of start by breaking it down with a formal stakeholder matrix.
And that's a huge challenge, obviously, for projects like this. Where, I guess, for those who aren't familiar with change management as a concept, where do you see the line drawn between what you do and what maybe the implementation actually implementing the software, which introduces just changes by default?
Yeah.
Where's that line get drawn in terms of process change?
So I get embedded with the team. So I join team meetings. Sometimes I join concept workshops, depending on the project, so that I can start understanding the users, uh, get a general sense of the scope of the change and the impacts, to the point of really to be able to flag the impacts that are going to come, so we can address them early. We start all that by doing a formal change readiness assessment early. So right when concept workshops are starting early on, we want to understand the culture. So what is the decision-making process at this company? Is there solid, clear ownership of business processes, or is it by committee? And this is going to be a challenge throughout the, right? What are the standard communication channels that are in play today? Are there regular department meetings that we can then leverage with project communication? Are they using a modern workplace? Do they have Microsoft Teams? And is that well adopted, so we can leverage that as a foundational piece of communicating about the project? Or an intranet site, like all those kinds of questions that are kind of basic. But when that modern workplace is not there, it's way more challenging to get people on board and understand and in sync. So that's an interesting one. In that readiness assessment, there's a few components. So we try to meet with the sponsors. Hopefully there's engaged sponsors of the project that are going to be visible, not just a figurehead, right? We want to understand what is the goal of the project. Sometimes we forget about verbalizing what the actual mission of a project is, right? Oh, we need a new system. Well, why? And what are the goals of it? Are you expecting efficiency gains? Well, what does that look like? So kind of pushing through some of those questions to sell the whole project to not just the organization, but to individuals. So the with them, the what's in it for me and what's in it for the organization. There's a fundamental part of change management. It's based on ADKAR. It stands for, I got my little cheat sheet here. It's awareness. So you start with awareness. You got to make everybody aware of what's going on. What's the timeline? What's happening? Why is it happening? And then once all the individuals, you feel like the individuals have become aware, then you start transitioning to desire. That's where the what's in it for me, what's in it for the organization comes. Then you get to knowledge. What do I need to know? When do I need to know it? And then you get to ability. That's where the training comes in, a training plan. And then after go live, you have reinforcement. Like you can't just go live and be done. What all too often happens is those things are done instead of in milestones spread out throughout the project. They're compressed and they're all done at the same time. And people can't take in all of those things at the same time. And you get kind of what we call the Swiss cheese effect. And that's really where some people get it, but then some key people are holes. Right? They're the Swiss cheese, the holes in the Swiss cheese. And so adoption is not as good as it could be. So we want to identify the right factors early so that we can help the team navigate through those sets of milestones. That readiness assessment, the sponsor is number one. Then we do a survey. I like to make it an anonymous survey. Everybody cringes at the word survey, but we try to make it fun. The way I push it is we want to give them as much information in the delivery of the survey as they're going to get. So you introduce it with, here's what the project's about. Here's why we need your information. We really need you engaged. And the questions, there's a typical set of questions, and then there's some varying ones. So one that I love is describe your culture. Right? And we give them some ideas around that. What's decision-making look like? Is communication good? There's a bunch of questions. Amazing the inputs that we get.
Well, and it's important that it's not a closed question by any means, right? It's not a yes or no question. It forces them to think a little bit about it, even though it's maybe stated simply, and a lot of people like to, I think, throw out buzzwords with culture, but at least it gets them to maybe answer something with a thought of their own, an original thought of their own.
I use a lot of NPS score type questions, so it's quantifiable. Looking for some sort of baseline questions, like how efficient do you feel at your job? Scale of 0 to 10. So if it's a 3 today, we do it after go live. You want to see that be higher. So they're trying to get some measurable things in there. My favorite one is finding ways to ask a question around time wasted today, currently. I just recently did one with a sales org, and there was 2 questions. One was, and you also have to ask this question carefully, right? One was, how much time do you feel like is time wasted, right? Pre-sale activities, and we gave a set of examples, and the other one was post-sale activities. There was 160 users, and the average we got was 4 hours a day between those 2 questions. I think that I think the math came out to 600 hours a day. So definitely room for improvement, right? And seeing numbers like that makes leadership go, oh my God, we need to do something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it'd be interesting all the follow-ups you could have out of that as to
Yeah,
what exactly they believe, I guess, is being wasted in that amount of time. That is a large chunk of hours for
for
sure.
sure. Sometimes it's perceptions. An additional question I like to get in there is around what processes that you practice regularly do you not want to change? And you'll get some interesting answers. And then, of course, the biggest one for functional consultants is what processes do you think could be better? And so we'll ask that question in a more detailed way, depending on the org, depending on the project. And then I'll share that data with the functional consultants so that they can see, oh, I didn't thought about this one, or I didn't hear this one in my workshop, or that wasn't on the SAL. We gotta loop that in here somehow, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times in a typical maybe discovery project, they might be too focused on solutioning or configuration and miss something that you see in a different type of conversation. The the main things I think I take away from it, it almost gets back to the communication and whether that's methods or the people hearing it. For us, a lot of these organizations, they're not small, right? Nobody's implementing D365 finance and supply chain if they're a $1 million business. These are typically enterprise sized organizations, and they're going to have different layers and sometimes sub companies, and the communication methods might differ even between those. And I'm sure you have your hands full with what announcements need to be made face to face in a Teams meeting, in a chat, via email. Those decisions are challenging. So, do you have, I guess, any specific methods or advice in that area around
Yeah.
communication?
Yeah. So, one foundational thing that I like to see happen is early on giving a name to the project. Sounds like a silly thing, right? But it can have a positive impact. You're focused on it kind of gives an identity to the project, can add a fun factor. An example I had is one project, they called it Project Yeti, as in the elusive, can we find it? And that this company in particular was migrating from a 30-year-old ERP, and they had had several false starts towards getting onto 365. I think they're still working on it. They're not there yet, but they joked around with the Yeti, like that they got little figurines and games, and it kind of added some lightness to the pain of what they were stuck in. Um, it can also add some branding, right? So you can have a logo that helps identify information, and people who are motivated to get in the know, that helps them stay in the know a little better because of the branding. Um, the channels, it's interesting statistically, the one of the best ways, there's a couple of keys. One is the messaging coming from sponsors, right? People want to hear from the executive level what's going on, that it's supported, how they will be supported in the long term, right? Because everybody starts freaking out about, oh my God, how am I going to get my orders processed when I have to learn a whole new system, and right, all those things. So they have questions really early, and if you can address them before they ask them, that's a win, right?
Yep.
So from executives, then one fantastic way to do it when we can pull it off is with what we call a change champion group. Different channel, right? It's not Teams, it's not SharePoint, it's not email, it's social, really. So you have your core team, process owners and subject matter experts. Typically, or ideally, a change champion group is not those people. It's the next level out. It depends on the size. Sometimes people do double duty. But what we want is those people to be advocates of what's coming. We want to give them enough forethought and information in advance that they'll go out and talk to their peers. They'll go out and share, hey, we're going to be able to do one set of shipping labels and not have to run them through this spreadsheet to get the 27 different formats anymore, right? Those kinds of stories. And that's one of the things I keep my ear out for, is those little scenarios that are going to mean things to people. And that's where, in a great team environment, I can partner well with our implementation teams, is when I can get them to call those things out. It's hard, right? Because in the heat of the moment, they don't think, oh, I got to tell Tracy this, right? It's
Yep.
figuring that
Yeah.
out. But the change champion groups, I like meet with them once a month or so, depends on the project. And we talk about, hey, how are you working with your peers? Some of them will play game. I've seen some really creative stuff. They'll get a video and share it. They'll get feedback, right? We want the feedback loop to go all around. And whether we get good insights from that channel or not, real power is in helping everybody feel engaged and part of the process.
What do you think is the biggest challenge in doing that?
The biggest challenge these days, well, with project teams and change champions, is time. Like, people just, there's a apathy, right? So you know me, I'm a people person. Like, I will always on camera, always trying to call them out. I don't let people be passive, and that takes some energy. And sometimes it's frustrating as heck, but that's really what it's about, is calling people out and saying, hey, Drew, what did you think about this? And sometimes I'll have pre-conversations with people to say, hey, you do a great job at explaining this. I'm going to call you out. So it's a lot of that kind of.
So you mentioned, being on camera, face to face. Obviously, we're remote in our line of work. One of the big changes or technology shifts now is AI and Copilot. And you mentioned, videos and training sometimes is a big aspect of change management and our projects in terms of getting buy-in, right, for new designs and solutions and technology.
Mhm.
Our partners are trying to learn where Microsoft is going. They have Copilot that's starting to be embedded. I've even seen it now in finance and supply chain, almost as a chatbot to replace help text, right? So instead of just looking up something, I can now have a conversation. So I can say, show me how to create a production order, and then show me how to release this production order. That's, I think, just seeing the possibilities with it and the governance of it
Super
is
cool.
is going to be a huge challenge for a lot of companies, especially at the enterprise scale, and what data to expose and not expose and hold people accountable. I don't know, is this something that's being talked about in
Mm,
change management? Have companies asked about
mm.
this and how to approach these types of projects?
Yeah, it's interesting. So digital adoption platforms are getting lots of attention these days, that sit right in extension in the browser, that can be contextual help, kind of a GPS for the application. They're expensive, right? They're very complex to keep up. Really cool when they're done well, but very expensive. They also are pitching them as change management tools, which is what's caught my attention and had me looking lately. Um, but I keep thinking that Copilot with Power Virtually, like that, it's definitely potential there to be this close, right? My fingers are an inch apart, to being a much cheaper and sustainable way to guide users and give users accessible help, right? Um, so we have a training department. I work with the training department. I don't train myself, but typically it's not always in the game, right? There's not always training resources. So what I push bare minimum with my clients is to have a very structured SOP library. Like, you got to have SOPs. They need to be in a template. They need to have clear ownership and governance. So what I envision, based on like the story you were just telling, is adding that SOP library to the Copilot language model, and then it can pull on the SOPs and the Microsoft Learn content. Right? and then you can grow from there.
It opens up so many efficiencies in onboarding. I think it gives you the ability to take, like you said, Microsoft standardize our business appropriate based on roles or maybe modifications or worker, there might be some offline processes still, that it could reference. It's a way to merge that gap that often is done through, I guess, face-to-face training, and sometimes that's difficult to do because, like you said, time and schedules and resources.
For sure, but it's also the application, the process that's hyper focused on the application is only part of it, right? They have pieces in Excel, there's other associated applications or processes that from the user perspective is the process. It's not just the buttons I push in Dynamics. It's where do I get the information from? Like there's the whole context piece. And that's where I think we can marry up content to help them navigate all that. Yeah. Then there's the whole change management of people grasping AI and how it helps them versus can eliminate their job. Like there's a lot of fear in some people. To me, the majority of it is exciting. I love that it can enable the tactics of things and open up people's time and mind space for innovation.
That's the piece that's key, right? I think people talk about automation, but that's automation for just simple, repetitive tasks that don't need a lot of thought or logic. There's always going to be, there's always going to be other things that we need people for. And even on the implementation side, right? Copilot might maybe make it easier for us to stand up a base configuration and do proofs of concept and things like that. But that doesn't mean we're going to eliminate the consultants.
So there's some statistics I didn't mention to you, Drew. ProSci, which is one of the leading organizations on change management, does a survey every year. And for like 10 years, the key statistic they share is that projects with change management are 6 times more likely to be successful and achieve their objectives. And when they did it in 2023, it's now jumped up to 7 times more likely to achieve objectives. So the argument to include it or make an effort there is irrefutable. What we find is the line when people sign a contract is, we don't need that. We got somebody who will do it. But when you really think about the numbers, it's a no-brainer to add the resource. The project manager just can't. They'll take on a piece of it, hopefully, big picture minded, but they just can't pull it off. It's too many perspectives to maintain in one's head. So that's my parting comment, I guess, is that just do it.
Just do it. I like it. All right, we'll do 2 to keep the fun factor going. We'll do 2 fun questions at the end, unrelated, I guess. So having been someone who's worked in this industry and having clients kind of all over the place, do you have a favorite place to travel?
Do I have a favorite place to travel? It's always the next place. I love to travel. My favorite place, if I ever have just a few days to go, is Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park in Maine. Just love the combination of ocean and mountains, and not really a beach person, so that's sweet spot.
Very nice. So that might answer the second question that this podcast is called Dynamics Unplugged. What is your favorite way to unplug?
Favorite way to unplug, actually, I like to go where there is, I don't know if I can give up Wi-Fi or cell service because, you got to stay in touch, but no TV. Turn it off, play some music, read a book, do some writing, do some crafts, whatever it is, to not think about challenges and stuff. And then I also have 3 grandkids that are my ultimate stress reliever, because you just got to be present with them and enjoy that. As you know well, the little ones are great to keep us focused on what's really important.
I do know, luckily this is an audio medium, but my daughter just joined us to end the show. So
Quite adorably.
That is a change I get to manage on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your time, Tracy. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Drew. Talk soon.